This is from February 20th of 2018. Notes on Maryland versus King. From the majority opinion, quote, a sample may not be added to a database before an individual is arraigned, and it must be destroyed if, e.g., he is not convicted, end quote. Is this like a sample of my genetic materials and or other forms of DNA that were taken from me at MPC in West Oaks? I was never arraigned and never informed that that was what was being done, but I knew, and that is what they did. Is that why the person named in my habeas corpus said that all the documents would be shredded? As if the documents would testify to prove that my DNA had actually been taken for testing in a criminal proceeding, but someone determined I was not guilty? Quote, the Act serves a well-established legitimate government interest, the need of law enforcement officers in a safe and accurate way to process and identify persons and possessions taken into custody, end quote. Kidnapping women, refusing to assist them with obtaining legitimate documentation so that they can be issued forged documents such that law enforcement can use them for financial responsibility in vehicular trafficking does not meet the above standard. Besides, that standard would only apply if I was determined to be guilty. Had I been guilty, then there would have been no reason to shred the sample, and it would have been necessary to produce it as evidence in an attempt to contest the conviction, which was intentionally denied and instead covered up to continue to proliferate additional abuses of privacy and other matters concerning DNA evidence. Quote, DNA is another metric of identification used to connect the arrestee with his or her public persona, as reflected in records of his or her actions that are available to the police, end quote. Insofar as I was denied recognition as a public persona, if in no other manner than by a refusal of law enforcement to assist me in obtaining legitimate identification after I had already reported an attempt by no less than 3 members of law enforcement to attempt to entice me into criminal acts or retaliate against me for refusing to engage in criminal acts. B, that I was investigating crimes connected to fraud in the Health and Human Services system. And C, that my identification documents had been stolen and used in the commission of crimes, then the above standard was not met. Indeed, I was refused several times the ability to make a report with the police, which would have been part of the, quote, records of his or her actions that are available to the police, end quote, in order to substantiate my claims regarding my investigation and to also deter any effort to substantiate acquisition of any DNA evidence in a purported criminal investigation of me. In fact, that I was not even able to file a report until after I had been issued a forged document by the Houston Police Department calls into question the credibility of the reporting process with the Houston Police Department overall, including their access to an accumulation of DNA evidence. Quote, second, officers must ensure that the custody of an arrestee does not create inordinate risk for facility staff, for the existing detainee population, and for a new detainee, end quote. That I was used in an experiment to remotely access military technical data, as was revealed and would be verified by an investigation of doctors' notes, including patient histories that attempted to create a profile of me for the purposes of the experiment, presents an inordinate risk for facility staff. That I was refused access to this evidence, and yet that DNA information was obtained as part of the experiment, that the access to that DNA information was allowed to be accessed by the Houston police while they later availed themselves of a presidential order permitting access to military surplus, while the Houston police availed themselves of this military surplus without making sure to secure access to or prevent any theft of DNA materials related to someone who had been used in experiments concerning military tactical data, and while they concurrently used me for illicit financial transactions connected to the forged document they gave me, presents an inordinate risk to the Houston police, as well as numerous others, including me. It is also a national security risk and evidence of commission of acts of sedition. Quote, DNA allows officers to know the type of person being detained, end quote. It apparently does. This is why the Houston police should have known better and should have done everything they could to assure that my attempts to report on fraud, other crimes, and other issues of national security were taken seriously and were supported with appropriate resources. Third, Quote, third, the government has a substantial interest in ensuring that persons accused of crimes are available for trials, end quote. I was not available for trial due to the extension of my kidnapping. I was also not available for trial based on assistance from any member of law enforcement or the legal community, as not one attorney, district attorney, or member of law enforcement assisted me in obtaining or securing evidence. Any evidence that was gathered was withheld from me, as I am representing myself pro se and have not had access to it, including any of the documentation of the DNA evidence that was obtained during the kidnapping. While my evidence was stolen several times and can be traced to financial deals using it as insider trading information that form a direct financial advantage to the very members of law enforcement and the legal community who refused to assist me.